All right, welcome back to NY DIY Mechanical Garage. This time we're going to do the drive shaft rebuild. So I bought a drive shaft rebuild kit from Tick Performance. I got the 3 bearings, the 2 rear bearings, and the 1 input shaft bearing in this kit right here, along with upgrading to polyurethane bushings, getting rid of the rubber goebos, you call them. Tick did send me built aluminum ones by accident. A little bit too aggressive for this one customer, so we're just going to go with the polyurethane ones from Tick. I'm not sponsored by them. This is just what the customer decided to go with, and I recommended. So let's get started. So first, we're going to move the slave cylinder right here. After we move the slave cylinder with the two 10mm bolts, we're going to go around to the back side of the torque tube and remove this big spring. All right. Snap ring, big snap ring. We're going to remove this big snap ring. Um, and then after we remove that, it slides on out this way, comes out this way. So once we do that, I'll start recording and we'll go from there. Okay, after lots of fighting because I didn't have the right snap ring pliers, I finally got it out. Once it's out, you can see the torque tube right there. Once the snap ring is out and the input shaft is hanging out of the front end of the torque tube, just get a rubber mallet and just give it a few whacks. It pops right out, and the drive shaft as a whole slides right out. This is the centering ring right here, so when you slide it out, it grinds along here, and when you install it, it helps you align it to put it back through the input shaft area. All right, so what we're going to do is this. We're going to, looks like someone did replace these Goebos because they smell like a brand new rubber, and the bearings look like they were decently recently replaced as well. I just want to point something out that someone was obviously in here because look, the front drive shaft was grinding up against the slave cylinder, and look what happened. Grinded it all out. So this car was definitely used. Oh, look at that, made in Germany. This car was definitely used. And it's a common problem between Corvettes anyway. It normally happens that these rubber Goebos go bad. So what we're going to do is take these Torx nuts out, swap out with the polyurethane bushings right here, and then press the new bearings on, which we'll go over next. All right, now that we got the drive shaft out of the actual torque tube, you can see it hanging out over there. Excuse my mess over here. I just got a lot going on with the control arm end of it. I just wanted to keep these tools out. But anyway, back to the drive shaft. Now that we get the drive shaft out of the torque tube, I just mocked this up. I already actually took the hardware out of the bushings on each end of the drive shaft. Okay. I see at the C7s went to aluminum drive shafts. The C5s are a solid piece of steel, which weighs a ton. Now, I know I'm probably going to get judged by putting this in the vise. You can put it in the vise and take these apart, but you don't have to crank in the vise. Literally, it's almost like, boom, that's it. Just enough to hold it. It is aluminum, so don't crank on it, but just tighten enough. Once it makes contact, just a little bit of a oomph, and that's it. But to get back to this part, now, to get back to taking it apart, now mark your drive shaft ends, back, rear, front, mark your drive shaft rear, your ends. Now, these are torque bits. It's going to be a T55 torque bit on each end, as you can see. Here are them right here. Now, when taking this apart, if you're a one-person job, you're definitely going to need a vise. You are, 150%. My recommendation is either get a propane torch. I'm lucky I have oxyacetylene here. Get a propane torch. You're going to have to heat up in the corners here, or if anything, at the end, because you got to get this Loctite hot. Not that hot, but just hot enough to melt, because there's a shit ton of Loctite on these bolts, and you're not going to rip these apart without either an impact gun and heat, or heat and a good leverage with a ratchet and socket, or ratchet and torque bit, I should say. So definitely heat it up. A propane torch is more than sufficient The oxyacetylene, you got to be careful you don't melt the glue. I don't want to melt these rubber pieces because these are brand new. I'll probably sell these online to somebody along with the whole clutch assembly, because the clutch assembly actually is still somewhat brand new. Someone was in here before me. Yeah, so now the order of taking these apart now. So let's start with the front. My recommendation is this. For the front input shaft side, start with this side, because at least you can get a socket, a T55 socket, to take these suckers out. As you can see, there's plenty of room. You get an extension on there. Once you heat up this aluminum, again, this is aluminum now. This is all aluminum. This is not steel anymore. Heat it up just enough just to get the threads a little bit warm, or get some heat into it to melt the Loctite. Get an impact gun on there, either a strong 3/8 or a 1/2 inch, whatever, and zip these bolts right out, okay? That's the first one. So start with this side first. You can take this off, right? Zip, 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 zip. Once it comes out, this is just a mock-up, right? Once it comes out, this whole assembly just slides right off, as you can see, okay? Now, once it's off, you can stick this in a vise with some, you can stick this in a vise like this, minus the drive shaft not in the way, okay? And either use clamp cushions or blocks of wood. Stick the input shaft in here, okay? Again, heat up the corners here, the threads, and then zip these bolts out, okay? So that's one procedure for the front input shaft end, okay? Now, for the rear, you're going to do the same exact thing for the rear for the rear tail end of it, okay? This time, you're going to start from this end, okay? The drive shaft side going this way. Take this out, heat it up, of course, do the whole thing. Take this out. Once you take this out and zip it out, again, I'm just mocking this up for everybody. This whole assembly slides right off. The bearing assembly slides right off. And now you can get on this side, okay, to get the, again, heat this side up, heat the drive shaft up, zip these off, and now your rubber gazebo comes out. Boom. Okay? Very simple, very easy. It's just time consuming because I recommend using heat because there's so much Loctite on these bolts. I'm going to clean this off and use red Loctite to put them together. Yeah, so that's that for disassembling the drive shaft. Now we're going to go over reassemble with the tick poly bushings. So just hang tight, all right? Okay, now let's start with the bearing replacement on the input shaft, okay? Now, I already did the job. The camera died last night, and I was on a roll. I just wanted to finish this and get ahead of at least get most of the job done while I was on a roll. So, this job, the bearing is already replaced on it, so I just want to go over the procedure the way I did it. All right, so this is the actual input shaft bearing, or input shafts for the C7, okay? Here's your input shaft bearing here. And here's the dust cover, as you can see right here. All right, I'm going to show you an input shaft from my C5, the NYDIY C5, which actually, literally, is pretty much the same input shaft, as you can see. It's just that the C7 has this extra, looks like a thrust bushing in there. The C5 doesn't have it. It's just like this. But I'm going to use this as an example. So my recommendation is this: either using an oxyacetylene, okay, or propane torch, whatever you prefer. This dust seal, if you try prying this off, you're gonna mutilate this thing. You're gonna bend it. It's gonna be absolutely horrible. My recommendation is this: stand it up this way, get a propane torch or oxyacetylene, and spin it and heat it up. And once it gets some heat into it, literally, if you whack it somewhat on a bench like this, this should just slide right off. Okay. It's going to cool down, shrink, because it's cooling, and then when you whack it back on, it'll eventually tap back on. All right, so that's that. Now, once you have this dust cover off, on top of this bearing, okay, is a snap ring, which I'm going to show you right now on the C5, because it's pretty much the same. As you can see, right in there is a snap ring, the groove right there, okay? Take that snap ring off, slide it off. Now, this bearing is ready to come apart. My recommendation is this. You can use a press and a bunch of things, but what I used was a bearing splitter. The bearing splitter worked awesome because it literally went around the collar, which I'm going to do right now. I'm going to show you. Okay, so now we have it in a bearing splitter. Look how awesome that is. Okay, now what you're going to do is put it in a vise, which I'm going to mock up, and you can whack the tip of the input shaft with a rubber mallet. So here's a setup. Flat side of the bearing splitter up. Put it in the vise, which I'm going to show you right now. Let me just turn the camera so you can see. Put it in the vise. Just enough so that the input shaft can clear the jaws. Okay, and literally with a rubber mallet, okay, with the bearing splitter somewhat tight, you know, or snug against it, get a rubber mallet and literally whack the top. Let me angle the camera up here a little bit. Literally just whack the top with the rubber mallet, and literally this bearing will press right off. Okay, it worked out great. And to install it, you can use the bearing splitter to reinstall it. My recommendation is a press. If you have a press, it's awesome. But you can also install it in the vise. Now installing it, this is the old bearing, but installing it, you can probably mock up something like a pipe or ball joint kit, and literally you can probably whack it on with a hammer going this way. But my recommendation is using a press with a bunch of either extensions or whatever have you to press the input shaft bearing on. Okay, so that's, I just want to go over something too. So when you buy, so the torque tube has 3 bearings. It has the input shaft bearing, and it has 2 output shaft bearings, which goes to a bearing cradle right here. All right. Now you can tell which ones are the bearing cradle and which one's the input shaft. The input shaft, okay, has a smaller bore, and there's only one. The 2 output shaft ends, or the cradle, as I should say, have a bigger bore. You can tell the difference right here. All right. I don't know if you can see it. Bearing cradle, input shaft bearing. This is an old one, but it has the same diameter as the C7. It has the same diameter, obviously, as the C5 and C7 input shaft. And this is an old one, just using it as a mock-up because I already pressed the new assembly together for the input shaft. But you can tell the difference. Bigger bores for the rear, smaller bores for the front input shaft. I just want to. Okay, let's start the disassemble and assembly and reassembly of the output shaft carrier. So there's 2 snap rings you got to take out. You have one big snap ring right here, as you can see, and then inside you have another snap ring on the actual shaft itself, on the spline shaft. So what we're going to do first, we're going to start with the small snap ring. Right? Yeah, small snap ring first. Get rid of that. Okay, now that we have the inside snap ring, just on the spline shaft, we have the inside snap ring taken off. Now we're going to press downward to press this whole spline shaft assembly out of the carrier bearing. All right, bearing carrier, I should say. So start with that first. Okay, so I have a press here. Again, I highly recommend you getting a press for this because it just makes life that much easier for you to set my camera up. There we go. Press this right out. Okay, worked out perfect. Oh, got my socket. That sucks. All right. And here's your carrier bearing assembly taken apart. Let's go back over to the bench. Okay, now that we press the bearing off, again, you're going to start off, this is how it assembles this way. Okay, like we said before, how it goes in there. All right. You're going to take off the inside circlip first, not the outside, the inside one, when the shaft goes in this way. Okay, and you're going to press it out through the bottom this way. So now the bearing carrier is over here. Now here's the output shaft, spline shaft assembly itself. Okay, we have this input shaft bearing we need to press off. So now what you're going to do is this: remove this snap ring here along with the other snap ring right on top of here, and now you're going to press this bearing off as well. And we're going to do that in the press also. So alright, so I ran a little bit of a problem trying to press this out. The issue that I have here is this. When I press this out, the output shaft is going to bind up in this like little, I don't know, girdle or press base, right? So I had to use the bearing splitter again. My recommendation, get a bearing splitter and have it in your toolbox because it is one of the greatest tools. So pretty much what I had to do with the input shaft is set up the bearing like this. Set up the output shaft bearing like this. Get the bearing splitter, set it up this way, flat side facing up against the back side of the bearing, so we can press downward this way. All right, so we're going to set it up. Got my press blocks right here. Look at that. Comes right out without a problem. Look at that. So we're going to go back to the bench, press the new bearings on, and go from there. Alright, now we're going to press on the first bearing. This is the new bearing right here. We're going to press it on this way. Okay, so just hang 10 and watch. All pressed on. Now what we're going to do is put the snap ring on this groove right here, and then get the snap ring on this groove, and then install the shaft into the bearing carrier. Well, but we also have to press out the other bearing that's also in the bearing carrier right now, if you understand what I mean. So just hang tight. Alright, so now we got this bearing on here. We already pressed it on, you just saw it, okay? We're going to put the snap ring on there. So we got one snap ring right here. Get yourself a pair of 90-degree snap ring pliers because it just makes life a little bit easier. So I'm going to put the snap ring on right here, as you can see. Hopefully you can see it. Let me angle this camera down a little bit. Bear with me. Boom. Okay. Alright. Snap ring on right there. On there. You got to use a little bit of a screwdriver to get it down. Snap it in. Boom. Nicey nice. You can see that's in there. Now we got the other snap ring. Put this snap ring on right there because we're going to press this whole assembly onto the shaft, and it's going to rest in the bearing carrier and also bottom out on the snap ring as well. So install this snap ring like so. The bottom ring. I'll manipulate it, so be it. As you can see, it's in there right now. So this is done for now. Now we got this big bad boy. We need to take this big snap ring out of here and press this bearing out of the bearing carrier. Alright, so let's do this right here. So hang tight. Alright, so what we're going to do is this. Now I have bearing and race drivers. What you can do is find a socket that, this is the old bearing we pressed out, okay? You can find a socket that can go on the inside of the bore here, okay? Put this whole assembly in a press and press out downwards. In this case, I'm just going to beat the bearing in because I actually have bearing race installers. But again, you can find a socket to beat this old bearing out. You can do it a few ways. You can heat this up with a torch, let the aluminum expand, and the bearing should fall right out. But the issue is that if it's still hot, and you put the new bearing in there, you're going to ruin the seal because the heat's going to transfer into that rubber seal and it's just going to annihilate it. So that's that. You can press it out. Again, you can get a socket or some sort of metal device to fit the inside diameter or the outside diameter of the inside race of the bearing and press outward and push it down this way and it'll pop out the bottom. Or you can set it in a vise like so, get a race seal driver and beat it downwards this way, and it will come out to the bottom. And also, you can install it that way as well with a bearing race driver and come to the top. So I'm going to beat them out in this case. So if you just want to hang tight and watch. As you can see, the bearing just popped right out, and that's that. So, all right. So we're good there. There's an O-ring in here. If it's torn, replace it. If not, you can leave it in there, which is fine. So all it is just water and so forth, just in case anything gets in there past the seal. Got the new bearing right here. I got all these bearings and the polyurethane bushings from Tick Performance. Again, I'm not sponsored by them. Just so when you go online there, it's relatively pretty easy. So, okay, here's a new bearing. I'm going to press the new bearing in there. Just I'll make sure it's seated all the way around. Looks good to me. Installed. Now we just got to press in this way on the press, and that's that. Alright, I just pressed the spline output shaft through the carrier bearing, or bearing carrier. I keep mixing it up, sorry. And I'm just going to put the snap ring on right there. Okay, we're all set. Alright, so let's reassemble the torque. Alright, so we're about to go back together now. So before we go back together, I just want to point something out that on the input shaft, where it meets the actual drive shaft, like I said, there's a brass pilot bushing in there. Just make sure you lube that up with some grease before you install it on the inside of it, and also on the shaft itself. Vice versa with the bearing carrier. On the inside, it's like a thrust bushing in there, or a pilot bushing. Just make sure you grease it up before you install it. So I'm going to put this thing on autopilot, and we're going to go back together. One note, though. When you install either factory bushings or aftermarket bushings, there's going to be a machined raised surface here, okay? This is the mating piece that goes up against the drive shaft and also the input shaft, okay? See how it's machined recessed holes? It goes right in there like this, okay? So it locks up like that, all right? On both ends of the drive shaft, rear and the front. So that's it. So let's go back together, okay? Okay, you saw me assemble both ends of the drive shaft. Now what we're going to do is insert the drive shaft into the torque tube assembly, in through the big end and out the small end. So again, this ring right here is a guiding ring, so when we install the drive shaft into the torque tube, it guides it through the hole on the small end right here. Once it goes in, we put the big snap ring in the middle right here, and that should complete our torque tube build. Oh yeah, then we're going to put a new slave cylinder at the very end. So, but just hang tight, okay? Okay, now that we got the drive shaft installed in the torque tube and with our new slave cylinder installed in the front, it can now be installed into the car. So any further questions, reach out to me at nydiy22@gmail.com. Reach out to me on Instagram, nydiymechanical, one word. Sorry for the noise in the background. It is cold in this garage. Yeah, and that's it. So just stay tuned for more episodes to be loaded up on the C7 Z51 Sinister Corvette. And I'll talk to you soon. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.